The dark night of the soul is a phrase used to describe a feeling of spiritual desolation, emptiness, or despair that is often accompanied by feelings of hopelessness and isolation. The dark night of the soul is often seen as a necessary step in the spiritual journey, a time of purification and transformation that ultimately leads to a deeper understanding of the self and one's relationship to the divine. I'd like to talk more about this process today, as I'm encountering more and more people who are going through it as the world wakes up from the illusion. Now, when I say illusion, I'm referring to the systems of control that have been dominating our collective thought process since the onset of civilization. It is a way of thinking that pulls one away from the spirit and turns the mind towards physical rather than spiritual matters. It pulls us out of our natural state of being in order to focus on more of a survival mentality, which of course stems from our really billions of years of evolution. We are these beings who are in this foreign territory, and we're trying to survive. So our biological instincts have contributed to creating this mindset of fear. And then, of course, as people create civilizations and you get leaders in those civilizations, if they're smart enough, they realize that they can control the people with that fear, with that survival instinct. So really, the process of waking up is just becoming aware that none of that needs to affect you, that you are not just a pawn in a game to be used by people behind the scenes. You are an autonomous individual held in spirit with a path that is destined for you, uniquely you. And waking up from that, waking up from the illusion, is about ridding yourself of limitations, doubts, fears, concerns, worries. All of that negative stuff that you've been carrying around your whole life can start to be diminished when you go through the process of the dark night of the soul. So when does it happen? When does it start affecting you? Chances are, if you're listening to this, you've experienced it or you're going through it right now. But if you haven't gone through it, you might be asking what triggers it. Now, depending on the person, that's going to be one thing all at once or a bunch of little things that accumulate and reach this boiling point. For me, it was kind of the boiling point thing, where all these little awakenings were happening in my life, where I was seeing things that weren't quite right, but I was just going along with them because that's what I did. That's what everybody did. That's what the world modeled for me. And so that's how I chose to live my life, even though it made me miserable and discontented and lonely. I kept following what everyone else was doing because, when we're asleep, we're like lemmings. We just look to what other people are doing, and then we do that because we think that's what we should be doing. But when you wake up and you realize that you're not a lemming, the terrifying world of possibility opens up. You might think that seeing the world as it is a great thing, that you'd be free from all these bonds, and while eventually that does happen, you still have to go through the process of breaking the bonds first, of escaping the cave, as Plato put it. If you haven't heard of Plato's cave allegory, I'll quickly go over it. It's basically, Plato had a philosophical thought experiment where he imagined a bunch of people in a cave, chained to the wall, and the only light that came in was from behind them, from the opening. But they were fixated on the wall, and as animals passed around outside, they would cast shadows into the cave. But the people would see these shadows and believe that's all there was to the world, was these shadows, never even thinking to look around and look at the light that's casting them. Except for one day, one person turns around, and he sees that light, and then he realizes that his shackles aren't real. He can break them at any moment, and so he does, and he leaves the cave, and he discovers a world of light and color and wonder and diversity and magic. He goes back into the cave to try and tell his fellows about what he's seen, but they don't believe him. You're a fool. Our whole world exists on this wall. What are you talking about? They even grow hostile towards him as his insistence grows that there is a world out there that they're not seeing. Eventually, they threaten to kill him. He leaves because he can no longer stay with the cave dwellers. So he must leave the cave and explore that new, exciting, but frightening world all on his own. That is what you will go through with the dark night of the soul. Chances are you don't have a heck of a lot of people around you who are going through this spiritual journey. Maybe you do, and that's wonderful. If you have someone you can talk to about this, it's going to make it so much easier. But I'm directing this to those of you who don't have that person to talk to, who feel alone and isolated, and are going through this extraordinarily transformational process, seemingly all by yourself. First off, you're not alone. There are millions across this planet who are awakening right now. There are communities, online, in person, that you can find. You do not have to be alone during this. Now, this process is different for everyone, but I'll kind of give you a little lowdown on how it went for me. I would say that my awakening really started after I watched this documentary series called Zeitgeist. I think it was a 2 or 3 part documentary series. I think I watched it back in 2011, 2012, around there. And then that was pretty much the thing that really started to open my eyes to the way the world really worked, to the way people were pulling the strings behind the scenes, to the fact that I wasn't really autonomous. I was literally a pawn in a game that was much bigger than me, that I didn't understand. I remember after I watched that series, I just sat in my car crying because I didn't know what to do. I had seen into this system that I was a part of, but I didn't know how to get out of it. I didn't know how to navigate my way through this maelstrom of control, a control that ran so deeply in our civilization that most people are not aware that they are essentially plugged into the matrix. They are easily to manipulate because they are so dependent on this way of life that to entertain any other possibilities terrifies them. I'll use the example with what happened with this virus that shall not be named. All of the people that turned ravenous against those who chose a different way forward, medically speaking, than the vast majority of people. Those people were vilified, were brutally vilified, lost their jobs, lost their homes, lost their families, their friends. Now, do you think that is the action of someone who is tuned into themselves, centered, present, whole within themselves? Do you think they would turn to someone who doesn't agree with them and try and destroy their life? We are on the cusp of an awakening, but in order to awaken, we all have to see how we're interacting with this world, with each other, and most importantly with ourselves. The systems of control are not easy to break. You have to willfully smash them with a sledgehammer. And in so doing, you will smash apart certain parts of your life. I have lost more friendships than I can count. I have people in my life who think I'm a little off because of the way I speak, of the words I say, of how I say them. If you are going through this path, you will have that too. It is unavoidable. You cannot wake up in a sea of people who are asleep and expect to still go unnoticed. You will get attention, and not necessarily the attention you want. But do you really want to go back to the way you were living before you started waking up? Isn't what is happening to you, even though it's scary at times, isn't it more liberating than the way you were living before? Now, it all depends on where you are in the process, of course. If you're just starting down the dark night of the soul, then you're probably in a pretty dark place. You're probably depressed and hopeless and fearful. And I know how that feels, and I am sorry you're going through that. But babe, you have to go through it if you want to rise up out of it. I come back to The Matrix a lot because, well, it's my favorite movie, but it is so full of metaphors about the dark night of the soul that it's impossible not to bring it into this conversation. Do you remember how Neo felt after he woke up on the ship, possibly regretting his decisions, wishing he could turn back? But Neo never would have become the one that he is if he went back to sleep. You are the one. I don't mean that you're the special one in the universe and only you are going to save everyone. I mean that the one is actually consciousness, a consciousness that all of us share. But everyone, because we get so wrapped up in our egos and the way we think that we are the special one. But the reality is that everyone is the special one. And in order to achieve that level of wholeness, of completeness, of unity within the self, of the ability to access those inner powers, you have to rise. You have to wake up, and you have to choose to be the one. Remember that scene again in The Matrix? I'm sorry, I'll stop after this. But that scene with the Oracle, remember how she said he wasn't the one? It was ultimately because he hadn't yet decided to be the one. And that's the kicker. You are the one unless you decide not to be. Then you're just like everyone else, plugged in. If you want to get to that level of freedom, of wholeness, of holistic health, of purpose, of passion, of true sight, then that has to be your only goal. That has to be your only path. And everyone who's trying to distract you on the sidelines has to just become white noise. You are on this path, and you need to keep going, no matter what people say about you, no matter how scary it feels, because I promise it will get better. I promise if you keep going through that dark night, you will see the light, and it will call you home. There's no way that it won't. What you will realize is that light has always been calling to you, but you had your head in the sand like everyone else because you were trained that that's where you need to look. That's not where you need to look. You need to look up, out, and onward. You need to find the truth within you. And the dark night of the soul is the only way you can do that. It's a process of going through all of your habits, all of your thought process, all of your feelings, all of your pain, babe. You have to go into your pain and heal it. This is not something that is easy to do. But once you see it, once you have that flash of awakening where you see through the illusion, I don't know how you could ever go back to living life the way you were living it. I don't know how you could ever put the blinders back on and pretend that that magical world that feels more real than anything else doesn't exist. So if you are brave enough to go through the dark night of the soul, to give it everything you have, to allow it to break you down to nothing, so that you can realize that that was never you. You have always been the one, the unconquerable. Nothing can take you out because you are the universe. Waking up is simply becoming aware of that, shifting your consciousness from thinking you're this tiny little insignificant human being in an expansive universe that never seems to end, or you are the universe. The shift that needs to take place is that you need to stop thinking of yourself as this small, insignificant little creature that can't affect change. You are affecting change every moment you breathe. Whether it's positive or negative change, well, that's up to you. But you are always affecting the world around you. And as you rise up in frequency and vibration, and you start to see the world from a higher perspective, you see just how far your impact goes. You can feel it. When you interact with someone, you can feel your impact on them. Literally, you can feel their emotions. It's intense, and it will happen to you if you keep going. Becoming a more spiritual being is about letting go of the layers you've collected of identity around yourself. You know, you're a man or a woman or a doctor or a lawyer or a whatever. It doesn't matter. All these labels that you've collected around yourself, these identifiers that you use to distinguish yourself in a sea of people. All those identifiers need to go. You are not those things. Your ego completely has to dissolve in order for you to start this new life where the ego is not in control. You're not going to kill your ego. Anyone who tells you that you got to kill your ego is just, I don't think they know what they're talking about, because you can't exist in this plane without your ego. Your ego is very important. It navigates this map, the map of reality. But if you let your navigator become your captain, now you got a problem, because it is only ever going to navigate you towards safety. I'm probably going to have to do a whole episode on just how our minds work in that survival mode and why we do the things we do, because I think I'm starting to babble in this one and getting off topic. But please know, until you wake up, your biology will dictate your life, and your biology consists of many things. When you wake up, none of that matters anymore. When you wake up, you are whole. You are centered. You are full. When you wake up, you become stronger than the darkness. The dark night of the soul will have no impact on you once you realize that you are light, you are love, you are everything, and nothing can stop you. Nothing but your own mental limitations. So if you're going through the dark night of the soul right now, first let me say, thank you. Thank you for taking up the challenge of cleaning yourself up so that you can look at the world from the perspective of light and love and harmony, because that's what you are. You are beautiful in the light. And when you realize that everywhere the light shines is you, there's no way darkness could overtake you. No way. So keep going. Keep climbing. And when it feels like you just can't move another inch, allow your intuition to lead you forward, because it will always urge you to keep going. That's what mine does. Whenever I feel like I can't do it today, this little voice comes in my head and says, just keep going. Please. I know you can't see it yet, but please, just keep going. And so that's what I say to you right now. I know you can't see where this is going yet, but I promise you, it is going towards something heavenly. And I mean that literally. So just keep going, and you will find your way out of the darkness. That, I promise you. I think that's where I'm going to leave it today. I hope this was a good first installment in this podcast, and I hope that you want me to keep going, because I like this format of just being able to talk to you, and I hope that you'll talk back. I know you can't do so on the podcast format, but come over on YouTube and catch me over there, and then we can have a conversation. Or better yet, come find me on Patreon. All the links are in the description. So, until next time, I wish you light, love, and harmony. Thank you for joining me.